All right. We are live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I should just say Heather and gentlemen, because no other women watch this show. We're too toxic. Um, welcome, everyone, to Religion Zero. Today we're talking number 48. I almost forgot the cue.
It's the only time I get to use this thing.
Religion Zero, number 48, critical theories and the church. Spicy. So, before we deep dive, what's going on in your guys' neck of the woods? It's the morning
for you guys.
Yeah.
Amos, you want to start that off?
It's cold. It's weird. No, we're getting our sporadic, like, one day it's a little cold, one day it's warm, but no snow.
No, it's a plus.
I hope.
Good.
I hope there's no more snow. For my job working outside and such, I am wearing shorts and t-shirt. So I am wearing uniform right now, at least technically. So it's just shorts and t-shirt. But no, it's pretty good over here. Not too much really going on. But the week is fine.
Very verbose. Yeah.
Yes. What about you, Brooke?
Allegory in there.
Good man. Not that much going on for me. I'm in a lot of pain right now. As I was telling Kong before we got into the show, I had a bit of an ear ache yesterday, and I got this. I don't know if people could probably see it on the table behind me. This little ear calm thing that I put in my ear that just made it a whole lot worse. So I didn't get much sleep last night because every time I move my jaw or my breathe or yawn, it was just painful. So woke up this morning. The air is feeling better, but now my jaw on this side is killing me. And I was telling Carl, I can't even chew. I can't eat anything. So I'm doused up on a bunch of painkillers at this point. So if I'm a little slow today, it's the drugs, and it's not the nice kind. So that's my big thing. The pubs are opening up hopefully this week. A couple of the guys in the area reached out and they say, "Yay, we haven't met up. Let's do some outdoor stuff." Beautiful weather. Spring is like in full effect. So hopefully I'll be out of the house more and get to meet more and more people. So yeah, let's see how it goes. What about you, Kong? You were sharing some stories about your in-house business. How's that going?
Ooh, another bad weekend for the books. I'm getting money, but at what cost? We had another set of locals that had 20 people over, and were smoking weed in the house and was blasting it through my air conditioner so that my whole house was freezing cold and smelled like a hot box. So I guess it's a cold box, if we're putting them together. But yeah, I dealt with that for the whole weekend. And they're still here. If you can hear them footstepping upstairs.
Cool.
No dog this time though, right?
No dog. Just a lot of yo dogs, right? Yo, what's up, dog? That's okay. Dad jokes all day. I'm tired.
Did you get what did Stewie Griffin call it? A context high?
Yeah. Especially the first night was extra bad. They had twice as many people, but it was just 2 nights of people blasting music until 3 a.m. smoking weed in the house, blah blah blah. So we'll see how that goes. So I made a lot of ramifications and updates on my profile so that if anybody does this in the future, they have to agree to the terms, and then I can find the shit out of them if they do it again. So that's fun.
The American way.
Take that, society. But yeah, other than that, everything's good. As you can tell, I'm my chin has now been exposed for the first time in 3 years. Get the chin going. There's a little bit of a butt chin there, but it's got just enough whiskers that it's hard to tell. But my chin's out in the air and breathing. So that's new.
Sun.
Yeah, I screwed up my beard trimming and just went all the way and just decided, nah, it's not going well. And that happened about 2 hours after last Sunday's broadcast. So I got a week of Scrabble going. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I've now completed the King of the Hill meme because my dad, I always say, looks exactly like Hank Hill, and now I look like Bobby Hill. Where is he now? So yeah, it's just the way it is.
Cool.
But
yes,
on to the topic. So I'm talking about critical theories in the church. This is the all-elusive incest baby we talked about last week. That was our premonition of what's happening this week. But first, I kind of want to recap briefly about what we talked about with postmodernism. Brooke, you want to give us a quick recap of what postmodernism is?
So postmodernism is a reaction to the Enlightenment, I guess the Enlightenment revolution in Europe, which kind of stressed the scientific method in terms of rationalism and empiricism. So it's two trains of thought that you can kind of reduce everything based on what your senses pick up, as well as the scientific method. And those are kind of like the ultimate sources of truth. And postmodernism kind of came out from that, basically saying, well, you know, your senses are kind of subjective. You know, the scientific method requires you to use your subjective senses. There really isn't any kind of serious one truth. So they started to expand a lot of those theories and challenged a lot of the Enlightenment. So that was the broad theory. And I guess what we're discussing today, I mean, basically, it's there is no objective truth is kind of the premise of postmodernism. When you couple that with other theories, it gets pretty spicy. So I guess we're going to be looking at some Marxism and, liberation theology and other things.
Ooh.
Where this was never really intended to go, but for some reason it has. So I guess that's kind of where we're going with this.
Amen. All right. So in order to talk about the incest baby of postmodernism and Marxism, we talked about postmodernism. So let's talk about our good old friend Marx, right? Amos, how would you describe Marxism?
Well, he would be the opposite of you in appearance.
Yeah.
He's pure hair.
Beard.
Yeah. You probably smell the same though. I got that going for me.
I don't know, the Bernie Sanders of his time. Was
a little more radical than Bernie Sanders, I'd say, but yeah, sure.
More radical and more unproductive as a worker. If you guys know anything about how Bernie Sanders was like a couch surfer until he was like 40 before he became the mayor of whatever city it was in Vermont
somewhere, yeah.
Marx was known among his peers as a horrible factory worker. And only really became important because of his works in communism, basically. So in the Manifesto. So wrote the Communist Manifesto, which was one of the most interesting April Fool's jokes because it was published on April 1st.
Yeah, it was.
Funny joke, man. 100 million people died.
Lol, Lamau.
Basically popularized a lot of those. Even I think Das Kapital, that was his too.
That was his work.
Interesting enough, and I was looking into this. He came up with the term capitalism. Yeah. It wasn't the capitalists who came up with it. But I always kind of like when people ask about like his ideas and such, I kind of go, well, he criticized everything properly. It's just his solutions that sucked. Which is typically how it is. People the thinkers of history that usually lead to detrimental theologies or ideologies tend to start fine. Like, I'm going to criticize this, and you're like, yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah, I can agree with this. Inequality and all this. And I think it's kind of the like postmodernism is like, it's that questioning. So you start with the questioning, and usually you're pretty good. It's when you start proposing the solutions, that's where you kind of go the wrong way. And that can be said about a lot of historical figures. But yeah, so he basically popularized, and a lot of people try to even say like, Marx only really wanted to have stateless communism, not the communism of the state that we've seen in history. But
Yeah, but what's the real difference, though? That's what I'm wondering, because I don't think communism can
you have
exist
your
without
hippie
some kind of
commune.
authority, right?
Yeah, you have your hippie commune versus the inevitable power of the state that is enforcing that cashless equality, which isn't really cashless equality because cash is cash. Money
Yeah.
is still there.
You get
So,
vouchers. It's not cash, I promise, guys.
yeah.
It's
Plus,
just
you
a
get,
piece of paper
but then it
representing value.
leads to it kind of where you have your more your market democracies kind of using human greed and selfishness sort of to its benefit. Communism takes that and turns it on its head. Now, greed and selfishness are made justified to exact so-called, justice and equality to then harm society. I think someone said, Jesus couldn't have been a socialist because he actually fed people.
Indeed.
So,
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
You got anything to add to that, Brooke? Any big pieces?
No, I think Amos kind of summed it up. So basically, the difference between capitalism and communism is property rights. So it really comes down to neo-Marxism was all about a stateless, cashless, governmentless kind of society where everybody was equal. Of course, that is practically impossible. So then you got like different factions of that. You got Maoism, you got Leninism, Stalinism, basically where they the Bolshevik, exactly. So we have where in order to create the communist utopia, we need massive government to basically violate property rights, right? The whole thing comes down to property rights. You're not allowed to own your production. It belongs to everybody. That is the premise. And of course, that has failed everywhere it's been tried. And now we're dealing with neo-Marxism, which is what they're trying to say is, yes, you still need the free market, but the government should control basically everything that the free market does. Corporate fascism at the end of the day. So that's the most recent rendition of it. And yeah, it's the classical struggle between the working class and the capitalist class. So they basically said that the person who's putting up all the money, taking all the risk, he's not actually putting in the labor. And Marx as well as Adam Smith was very big on the labor theory of value in terms of everything had value because of labor. They're both wrong. Mises came out and basically said, no, it's completely subjective. The amount of work that the fortune teller at the carnival is putting in for $5, which is probably bupkis and entertaining, is still a subjective, take on value, right? And of course, it has problems when it comes to things like assets. So land is not putting in any work, but land continues to increase in value. So there's a lot of problems with the Marxist. And I admit even Adam Smith got the labor theory wrong. And yeah, his solution was ridiculous. And it really came down to the idea that all these people were going to aspire to the human condition and give up all their selfish ambitions and work towards the common good. Never happened and probably never will. Especially when there's power and money involved in the state. It's not going to be Mother Teresa's that are going to seek out money and power. It tends to be pretty scummy class types of people who really think they should rule over others. So that was the fundamental flaw amongst many things in Marx's theory. He really thought that mankind could aspire, to a greater, higher ideal, but he's imposing that on people that obviously don't share those values. And that's why we have the disasters of socialism and communism and other things.
Yeah, I think the big difference, just talking about the difference between labor is the prime value versus property is the prime value, right?
Yeah.
They went over this a bit last week on the Lex Friedman podcast. If you guys know him.
Oh, I like Lex Friedman.
The young up and comer, like AI tech guy.
Russian.
And, he's obsessed with artificial intelligence and consciousness and all of those things and all how, crypto affects the world and all those. And he had a guy named, I think it's Robert Breedlove, and they were talking about, like, in essence, what is capitalism and communism. And that's what they talked about is the difference between property and labor. And he said the first capitalist of all time was the caveman who decided to dig in the ground and put his hut there.
Pretty much.
Right? The act of him manipulating and taking ownership of that space of land, and that all capitalism is based on space of land. And that's why, we had those big, huge exploration phases, right? Where like the cool guy was the guy exploring to foreign lands and setting route and taking supplies and things like that, because exploration was like the most mass, it's essentially wealth accumulation when you explore, right? And that became one of our divine virtues. But nowadays it gets a lot trickier because pretty much all livable land has been explored, right? We've got satellites, we've got, we've got GPS, we've got ways to check every little square inch of the, the world on Google Maps. And we've pretty much already found all the habitable land by now. So like, if you want to go explore Antarctica and put your house there, good luck. That's no longer really comprehensible, right? And so to me, and this is where it's kind of going to my opinion instead of their opinion, it's like, I think this is why so much communism is coming up again, because the concept of exploration and wealth accumulation is no longer like relevant, right? Pretty much all property that's worth taking has already been taken, right? And so if property that way is unable to flourish on your own, now people are starting to get into the hims and haws and the gear works of what we already got. And I think that's also what kind of breeds communistic thought. Because if you can't get ahead by exploring and getting your own way, and building your future, which is so completely possible, but they don't educate you about that in high school, I would argue on purpose. They would rather
concur.
Yeah, that they want that factory worker. You know what I mean? They want that 9-to-5 guy to keep the gears turning for their economy of the actual rich people, right? And so I get where communist thought comes from, but it's so bad, long term wise, because if you're only valuing your personal labor, then that actually throws actual progress and creativity and invention out the window. Yeah, because if you work really, really hard, digging in the mud and not finding anything, are you still equal value of the one guy that creates the phone? Right. Exactly. But the guy who created the phone, he was just tinkering with his hands a bit, met with businessmen and, borrowed someone else's electricity. He isn't really worth that much. But me, I've been digging 12 hours a day for my whole life. Like, that's not actual valuable labor, right? So labor is not a unifying value concept, right? And that's just from the economic standpoint, but let alone the where it's going to now with the philosophical ramifications of it, right? I think with Marxism, a big part of it is the dialectal. Is that Hegel, something like that? They did that, and that's Hegel. Yeah, and that's the whole thesis, antithesis, synthesis idea, where you try to find contradictions and you have the two opposing points and you have to find a way to synergize them, right? To try to remove contradictions. And I think this is the one of the tipping points of where we get into wokeism and critical theory, right? Because, like Amos was saying, it's about criticals. It's about trying to find problematic things, right? Everywhere. Correct. Right? Even if they don't exist.
And you shall find.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is where I think it moves into that. When you put the postmodernism is everything's relative or subjective, right? We're so far separated from reality. Like before, last week, I was talking about simulacra and simulation, where everything in our life right now is so built up that everything's 3 or 4 degrees away from like the actual reality. The common example I think I talked about there was like oranges. So you had wild oranges, and then you had, GMO, like specifically bred oranges that are bigger and juicier. Then you had orange candy, and then you had orange soda, and actually orange soda has nothing to do with oranges outside of the color and the logo, right? No oranges are involved in the making of orange soda. So we're that far separated from everything. So when you deconstruct those and ask those questions, like Amy was saying, that's not necessarily
Oops.
Have we lost Kong?
He just froze.
Amos, you still with me?
Yeah. You hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you. Yeah,
Oh,
Kong,
yeah.
welcome back. Yeah.
I guess my Wi-Fi went out for a while. Yeah, that was a scary moment. Just all the lights go out. Metaphorically.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know where I cut off at.
Yeah, just saying things are so far removed from the realities of it, like the simulation and simulacra.
Yeah,
and the
So, yeah,
oranges. Yeah,
Orange
you got the-
soda. And
yeah.
then, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah. So orange is an orange soda. Like, even though we could see the pattern of how it was created, it has nothing to do with the original, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So the postmodern thought is, okay, deconstruct those, try to find a way to base reality, even though we probably never can't. That was Baudrillard's thing. Like, he called the desert of the real. I don't know if we talked about that. That it's hard to find truth, and when you do, it's unsatisfying, like a desert. Because your life is so based on simulacra, which are heightened, cooler versions of the real world, that you don't even want the real world, right? And that's the Matrix analogy of Cypher. Cypher unplugged and realized it sucks ass that he wanted to go back in, right? And so the desert of the real is the real world, which is less dopamine injecting than our fake world, right?
basically
so-
social media.
Yeah, so I think it's still good to deconstruct, like we said before. But the problem is if you're deconstructing everything and everything doesn't have meaning now, or its point in it before, then you have nothing to add on, right? And I think that's starting where that goes. Do you guys have anything to add?
I think that's a very good summation. And as it does come down to the dialectic, which is Marx was, the capitalist was oppressive, and the bourgeoisie, the ruling class was oppressing the proletariat, and that was kind of the dichotomy that he was trying to emphasize. And that is where you see the world between oppressor and oppression. And like you say, seek and you'll find. If that's what you're looking for, you'll find it. Right.
Mhm.
So that's I figure that's where we're going with the conversation.
Oh yeah, Amos, you got any add-ons or suggestions?
Ditto to what Brooke said.
Okay. And ditto to what Amos to ditto to Brooks said. All right. So when we start criticizing, I think this is the hugest issue with critical theories. So critical theories, we should define that term, I guess. Critical
luck.
theory, yeah, is a lot of this very, very new wave of politics. It started, 60, 70 years ago, but now it's gaining a lot of steam due to the internet. And I can talk about how the internet's influencing it too, but the essentially critical theory's assumption and philosophy is taking Marxism and postmodernism and saying, okay, we can deconstruct everything except the lived experience, right? So I cannot deny Brooks' truth to life, and I can't deny Amos's truth to life because I haven't experienced it, right? So your own subjective consciousness experience, your lived experience, and specifically they focus on the oppression of your experience, that cannot be deconstructed. So that is the only truth. So the only truth is how bad you feel. Everything goes out the window. And so once you start learning that train of thought of, the postmodernism and the simulations, and you start learning about Marxism and, criticizing and like trying to, synthesize all of these contradictions and stuff like that. Once you start going down that train of thought into this, you'll realize you're trying to destroy everything except how much the only true value now is your identity markers. It honestly, at this point, it's not even about labor, right? Your personal identity and how you feel about things is the only objective truth, and that's how you get there. So critical theory is just in general. So there's critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical sexuality theory, critical whatever, fill in the blank theory. And all of those are all about that idea of dissecting and trying to deconstruct things and try to find out who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, right? Because the good guy and bad guy is only based on how bad you feel in that moment. Right? So where do you guys see critical theory popping up?
Where don't you see it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I agree with the assessment, and how do I say, the problem with the critical race theory is the same problem the Enlightenment people had with the empiricist, where the only reality was your senses. So they basically kicked that out, and now it's not even what your senses are saying, it's what you feel. They've gone to like the complete abstract, and it's basically the emotions of the sense of the whole thing has become the truth, the ultimate truth. And of course that's a very, problematic, to use the phrase, way of approaching it. Like we've all probably seen a horror movie, right? We've all watched a scary movie, and we've all probably experienced the emotions of fear to something that is not real, right? So your emotions are even in your own head. Like, anybody wants to try the exercise, you could close your eyes and imagine a tennis ball, and you're holding a tennis ball, and you will feel the tennis ball in your mind. Now imagine you're holding a golf ball, and you will actually be able to tell the difference between the two. But there's no fucking golf ball, right? There's no tennis ball and there's no golf ball. It's all subjective in the mind. So the brain does not know the difference between the abstract concepts of our mind versus the reality, right? This is the matrix thing. It's all a bunch of signals in the brain, right? Your brain right now is sitting in complete darkness, but for some reason you have a perception of light based on the signals that your eye is sending. You can do that totally internally in your imagination, and your brain doesn't know the difference. So this is the flaw that the critical race theory people fall into, because now they completely ignore the reality of the senses. They completely ignore rationale, logic, reason, and all of these other things, and they've elevated emotion and feeling, which again is completely subjective, but that has become the ultimate truth. And they basically built that up into this pseudo religion where your emotions have more weight based on how deep in the oppression Olympics you're basically falling. Whether it's gender theory, race theory, or whatever, intersectionality, which is the union of all of these concepts. But the problem is none of that is based in reality. All of that is completely subjective, and not even subjective in terms of a reality that you could actually like tangibly measure or anything like that. So that's when it gets really. And to answer your question as to where we see it come up, everywhere. It's in the movies, it's in the public discourse. I think your Congress has just put out a thing about you can't use gendered language. Out here in the UK, we have people who are basically being arrested for the guilt of offense. Offense is not something you give, it's something you take. You have to want to be offended by something. So our legal system is being turned up over this, and it's becoming a disaster. I think the only place I don't think this is really taking off is Russia, and that's because Putin is basically slamming down his boot on a lot of this nonsense. And your previous president was actually trying to do something to fight it, but it's a deconstruction of reality. And the problem is the outcome of that is you're not a functional human being at the end of it, because you don't know how to reason, how to use logic, how to be integrated into the real world. All you know is oppression and victim status. So yeah.
If there is no truth, then there's only winners and losers. Is
Correct.
essentially what it turns into. And I think that's why somebody
values winners as being victims.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you are at the bottom of the power structure, the only thing that matters is you now have to get to the top of the power structure, right? It has nothing to do with rationality or logic. And I think this is where a lot of people get, or merit. Yeah. And the reason, I think this is a big deal is because you see so many people, you see all those dumb articles as like why math is racist or why science is sexist and all these kind of things. And like most people go, oh, look at these dumb people, but you got to know where they're coming from, right? They're only putting that out so that you will talk about it and they will win. Right. I think that's the interesting thing. If your only goal is to deduce and deconstruct and only care about your lived experience, then all you can do is shout and scream and holler and try to get more people on your side that way, because rationality is racist, right? So there's no debating with them. There's no, trying to reason out why it's dumb that math is racist, even though we all know innately that's dumb, right? That's a dumb sentence. But in the mind of the critical theory, using all of that Marxism and, postmodernism framework for it, like that's the only thing, right? because one time there was this one girl or there was this one, minority that felt bad. Therefore, deconstruct the whole establishment, right? Because their feeling bad is more important than your math and engineering and science, right? Because all of those are all subjective to them. They think they're all simulation. So yeah, Amos, what about you? where have you been seeing it? Where have you been seeing some bad conclusions?
Well, if you look into the history of critical theory, so critical theory came from the Frankfurt School, and it began back in the 20s and 30s during the sort of the end of the Weimar Republic, and in some ways contributed to the rise of Nazism in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting how that played out.
Yeah, Godwin's law.
Basically, what's that?
Godwin's law. Nazis got to get into it somehow.
Well, I was just looking at it because the big thing right now you hear a lot about with critical theory is you have critical theory as a way of examining and criticizing society, social structures and stuff versus Socratic method. So, and I was kind of eyeballing, kind of scanning through some of the stuff here, but basically showing how critical theory is the approach of social philosophy that focuses on reflective assessment and critique of society in order to reveal and challenge power structures.
Mm-hmm.
It's really it.
It's
just, we're challenging power structures and
not to solve anything. Just
that's going to say there's a lot of challenge, but there's not a lot of solution, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really not just the challenge, but also the explanation of why that challenge needs to happen. Mm-hmm. So you start challenging institutions. For what reason? Why are you challenging that? Not that institutions should never be challenged. That's kind of the post-modernist thinking of, you critique things, you're challenging the old ideas. But it's where it's when you look at, let's say, certain inequalities, the critical theories of today would kind of jump immediately to racism. And you could just be like, well, it's not necessarily racism. It's these other issues that are that are beyond race, that are beyond sex, that are beyond gender things. It's overall issues. When you look at, if they want to look at wealth inequality, well, they'll say certain races are more adversely affected by wealth inequality than other ones, or income inequality. Well, you can address that on a whole bunch of other things to say, well, that's not just a race thing. You might see racial outcomes, biased outcomes, but it's bigger picture issues. So the Socratic method would probably look at that and go, both of them would say, we think there's an inequality here. Socratic method basically tries to break down all the different theories and goes, which ones make sense, which ones don't, and let's parse through all of that. Critical theory is power structures. Mm-hmm. It's people groups, it's power structures, it's institutions. Then they start to go into these grand, almost conspiracy theories that start to challenge it in the wrong way. Now everyone is kind of blaming these issues on race, on other things, and which is funny. Where would they have ever gotten that idea and somehow turned that into Nazism? It's not like the Nazis questioned anything and blamed it on. Oh yeah, they did. They blamed it on the Jews. Because that's everything it was. It was there was issues with the banks, there was issues with their economy, which all just really was attributed to World War I. But they were like, no, it's all the Jews. The Jews are in the banks. The Jews are in these institutions. They're messing with everything. It's kind of that same thing. These people groups are in these institutions oppressing these other groups. Therefore, the outcome and everything is purely attributed to a group. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of today is everything is attributed to white people, or everything is attributed to
everything bad.
Bad. Yeah, everything bad is attributed to white people. Everything good is attributed to minorities. Now it kind of, this is what I've also seen too, is all the good and the bad gets lost in all the other good and the bad. So that you could have a sea of data, and part of this could be this thing. It's a small part is this. There are minority minority groups that have contributed to all these good things. There's also these majority groups that have contributed to these good things. There's also majority groups that contribute to bad things. Like white people have done bad things, but also have Black, Hispanic, Asians, Indians, and all those other groups. They've all done it.
Mhm.
So you look at the bigger. It's important to look at the bigger picture, because the Socratic method would say, well, it doesn't make sense just to blame this one group. The Socratic method wouldn't even address that. Critical theory would say, oh no, it's the power structures. Because if all the white people are doing all the bad things simply because it really is, if you look at the Socratic method into critical theory, the only reason all the bad things are blamed on white people is because white people are the majority. If you go to South Africa,
Mhm.
the reverse would be true.
No. They're still blaming the white people in South Africa, even though they are a minority.
Colonization, bro.
Yeah,
But I mean,
so they're taking the land from the white farmers.
You could turn the narrative on its head and say, well, with all of the Black people that are in power, that are like, what is it? They're redistributing all the land from the white farmers. They're doing all this stuff. A lot of the white people are becoming refugees. In a slightly different world, it could be turned on its head to say, well, then the power structure is Black people against white people. There are parts of the world where that could be true, if in a vacuum of critical theory, but that isn't, because America's majority white and America's the power, kind of the superpower of the world. You could even say that there is, a power structure in China. The Asians are everything bad and racist in China is the Chinese's fault.
But no, it's
really,
our fault, bro. I think
it's our fault way over here.
It is to them, because I think this is an important point. Is it's not necessarily just about like your literal skin tone. It's about how you express, and their definition of expression is pretty vague, right? If you think the scientific method is good, and you think math is objective, and you think having a market and entrepreneurship is good, that is white supremacy, right? It doesn't matter your skin color. If you think capitalism is a good method, that's a white man's thing. It doesn't matter your skin color now. You are now engaging in white supremacy, right? So the fact that China has a market, it has electricity, it has infrastructure that they borrowed from white people, therefore they're all white supremacists now because they're expressing it that way. And that's just like the economical main part of the whole idea of race. But I mean, you can go into gender too, where how you express your gender is more important than your actual gender, right? Or sex, or however you want to play those word games. For example, in critical theory, what's his name? James Charles is allowed to have more opinions about women's issues than Ann Coulter, because Ann Coulter is a lot more white male patriarchy centered than James Charles is, because James Charles expresses himself more feminine and into feminine theory. Therefore, James Charles knows more about women than Ann Coulter in the eyes of critical theory.
Well, a lot of that thinking is a product of critical theory, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not directly attributed to it. Like, this is the thing: is critical theory, from what I've kind of looked at, is kind of the one side. Like postmodernism, in and of itself, is just questioning modernism. So critical theory is critical of these structures, but it's the conclusions that are being drawn now. Like in the beginning, like I said, it's always the criticisms are fine. It's the theories and conclusions that come afterwards that are the problem. So, because I think like the oppression Olympic side of it, like, who is more oppressed, therefore their opinion is more or less important, kind of came afterwards.
I mean, that's the intersectional argument that's pretty recent. I would agree with that. Much of this is pretty recent in that respect. And yeah, you get virtue points. As you say, it's about expression. And it's also, this is the Marxist side of it, where they're trying to bring about they don't use the word equality, they use the word equity. which has a completely different meaning.
Yeah.
But what ends up
Horrible one.
Yeah,
happening?
you have that in your house, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's this is so is they're against things like the family, like the nuclear family.
Mhm.
So because white people have a nuclear family and they have a healthy, more people tend to be successful that are white and they blame the fact that they got a mom and dad. So they are opposed to the nuclear family so that, that would somehow bring about some equity so that white people be more in line with what black people have to experience, or, other, minority groups that may not have as many nuclear families. How is that beneficial? Like,
Yeah.
like how by cutting off the avenues of which people can actually succeed and progress and move humanity forward, we're just going to cut all of that off so that we could all be equally poor, equally like unable to progress, equally lack of opportunities. And this is, as you say, pointing out the flaw of presenting solutions. Their solutions suck. Right?
Yeah.
Their solutions aren't really there. It's just about tearing things down, and that there's no winning in that.
Yeah, like it's the whole idea of the play the tape through, right?
Correct.
And I think that's a big deal throughout all of this.
Defund the police, for instance.
Because I can see how we got here from the Age of Enlightenment, right? If you play the tape through of Age of Enlightenment, if you're all essentially Age of Enlightenment was, Nietzsche called it "we killed God" kind of thing, where we're trying to find out all the truth ourselves and figure out things instead of trusting or blah blah blah. And then that we get into modernity, and where we have everything deduced down to principles, and then you have postmodernism where you realize even our principles can be deduced down, right? And it just keeps going farther down the line. It's playing the tape through. So if you play the tape through of this critical theory thoughts, okay, this family system, like if you're looking at the power dynamics, okay, the successful people had families, right? Therefore have no families. At the end of the day, when you play the tape through, you're only criticizing things that work. If it's on a power structure, usually it's because it works, right? There's a reason some things win and some things lose. And this is the big difference between the free market and critical theory stuff, is the free market says, okay, if it works, keep doing it. And critical theory says, if it works, it's bad.
It only works for some. That's their argument. So it's not equally working for everybody, which is the Marxist side,
Yeah.
We're all one. We're one. All
it looks at outcome over input.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't understand so a lot of Socratic method and also just looking at issues, you would want to focus on, okay, the bigger picture of, okay, let's say, what's one that wouldn't get too spicy?
They're all spicy.
Violence. We'll just say inner city violence. You could look at inner city violence and go and say, okay, why is inner city violence happening? Well, some would say, well, because of purely because of police and racism. Mm-hmm. And then but then the Socratic method would go, okay, well, let's actually look down those avenues and say if that's actually true. Well, let's look at statistics regarding police interactions with people and brutality and stuff. Well, that doesn't happen quite as often as people would like to think. And then it would look at, where is this violence being? Okay, well, violence in the inner city. Well, what does that mean? Okay, is it happening in these more poor neighborhoods? Okay, why is it happening there? Poverty tends to lead to crime, petty crime typically, which then develops into more violent crime. And then you could maybe they would say well, there's interracial violence. Blacks and Asians are fighting each other. Well, where is that happening? Oh, that's at the intersection of Black and Asian neighborhoods in these areas. Violence was happening within their neighborhoods anyways. It's just happening a lot at the intersection of their neighborhoods. So you will look at that and could basically deduce to, okay, poverty is really the issue. And poverty is affecting all the groups. But instead, critical theory would just say, well, there's races involved, and there's white people that is majority in the city, therefore racism. Whereas Socratic method will kind of parse through all those theories, all those issues, and go, what is making the most sense here? Why is this really happening? Mm-hmm. It would look at the input of poverty being the issue. It wouldn't look at as the outcome of racial violence as a racial issue.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that, of course, is the wage gap, between men and women. which has been
Right.
debunked 5 ways from Sunday.
Yeah.
So it's the idea that, if you take all of the men and all of the women and you pair them up and, you compare the money that they make, women apparently make 75 cents to the dollar in the US, or I think out here it's like 80 cents, whatever the case is. But when you actually get into the nuance, like how much work are they actually doing and how many hours have been worked and education and all of these other things, how much men
Choices
are more
in their
willing to
job
do.
field.
Yeah, how much more they're willing to take
Willingness
on
to
a
ask for
risky
a raise.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes down to a lot of life choices. There may be a very small sliver that they claim might be sexism, which is probably more having to do with the women just generally are less assertive when it comes to money. Men are willing to kind of come forward and ask for the job and ask for a raise and all of these other types of things. But all of those inputs and all of those factors are swept aside for the bigger meta narrative of sexism, right? So women are just oppressed. Even though at this point in time, I think there are more women enrolled in higher education and universities than men, at least in the UK. I think it's also mirrored in the US at this point. And they've got all sorts of affirmative actions for women and grants and all these different types of things, but somehow they're still oppressed. So
I think if you adjust for all the proper factors and actually look at the wage gap more properly, women make 7 cents more per dollar. So like
when they're young.
So when you adjust for things like, the wage gap the overall wage gap argument didn't account for like childbirth, taking time off, and you said those things like there's job choices, qualifications. Also, men tend to reach higher when it comes to promotion and job like entrance, so they'll actually like not just move more within the job, but also start at a higher point because they're more ambitious. So when you adjust for all of that and you try to make it like basically men and women who have the same exact kind of variables attributed to what's going on, women make just a little bit more than men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While they're young, that's true.
Yeah. But no one really wants to like.
I'd like to thank Twitch and OnlyFans for that, but
at the end, the porn industry, women are paid a lot more than the men. That's the thing.
Oh yeah, or we know. You think we'll ever want to get Sterling Cooper on this? No.
That'd be a fun discussion.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Pour it in the Bible. No.
We got a whole book of it. We got a whole.
Well, he always talked about like something about he would always get like a few $100s per shoot. Women would get thousands of dollars per shoot
and get treated like celebrities. Yeah.
Yeah, the conventions and stuff, it's all women. There are a couple of men there, they get an award, but they don't make the bank like
unless you're Johnny Sins, you're nobody.
unless like the big ones, But yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is where a lot of I don't know. I kind of want to go into like, we're already halfway in, so we should probably see how this applies to the church or religion in general, right? Where do you guys see that? Because I think it's obvious there are some churches and a lot of the critical theory, like, talking heads, consider themselves like pastors and stuff of churches that are baiting onto this. Where do you think the critical theory influences getting into the church? Like, how do you think it's being introduced?
How is it being introduced to the
church?
Well,
it's so again, a lot of these, like Brooke and I have definitely talked about like different when it comes like atonement theories, and when it comes through a lot of different ideas of salvation and grace. A lot of these were kind of postmodern in terms of like we're questioning a lot of theology. You're questioning fundamental theology. So you have this new wave of Christians who are more gracious, more inclusive, and trying to kind of break the mold of the fundamental, judgmental sort of fire and brimstone Christian. But through that, so you have these people who are more understanding, more open. They're not like just hardline Christians. The conservative Christian sort of stereotype is being broken. But through that, it's kind of in the name of inclusion and allowing things to just be as they are. a lot of other ideas kind of seep in. So on one hand, we're trying to be inclusive. We're trying to, like, you have a true diverse church, let's say a congregation, not only just diverse, not trying to necessarily focus on diversity of race or ethnicity, but even just diversity of theology too. Like you could have these groups where everyone kind of have a slightly different take on certain theologies, like the three of us here talking, or even, when we had Bobby at one point, we had Catholic and Orthodox, Protestant, and kind of, all that mixed in there. Evangelical. Yeah, we're having stuff. We're having all this together.
Christian. I just do stuff.
Yeah. And that's you could say in a way a postmodern sort of take is like we're questioning these roles, we're questioning the structure to allow ourselves to associate with each other and basically have a form of kind of discussion and essentially church. But the next step beyond that, where it kind of goes wrong, is then, like, if we were looking in and go, you know what, we need at least one more black guy because Bobby's a minority. Let's just say if Bobby were here, like we would go that route, and then that kind of gets mixed into the theology now, and then it starts turning into a political side. There's a political statement within it. Now the pastor is up there not just talking about, Jesus and loving you and salvation, but then it starts turning into intercession prayer, intercession prayer or revival sessions talking about racial justice, trying to I know some will kind of get into it and kind of keep it very low key on like how they go into it, whereas some will go above and beyond, and then you'll get the white Christians in the church, essentially what's the word I'm thinking of? Kind of almost virtue signaling to the black and Asian and Hispanic Christians in the church. So we're so horrible. Like it kind of gets all really mixed in when it's essentially it's very non-scriptural. We're neither Greek nor Jew, free nor slave, man or woman. But then they might turn that into, well, then that just means, all this other stuff is okay then too. Like, it's like you have the gender stuff, the race, sex and gender are separate. So then you have gender theory, critical gender theory, basically. But then there's scriptures that say that's spiritually, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of skewed verses on both sides, right? And for there, it's like you're talking about. There's no slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, blah blah blah, in Christ. And so I think that's part of it goes into. And I think we might have talked about it last week, but also like critical theory, especially how it's expressed right now, really is a religion, right?
Yes.
They have their own performative rituals. You have to, denounce your own privilege. You have to do all of these things. You have to essentially ass kiss to everybody who's more oppressed than you.
You have original sin.
Yeah, they have original sin of being born to parents who didn't choose, and that changed your skin color. And it's a lot, and that also kind of goes in line with also that they don't like rationality, right? They don't like the discussion. They want you are right or wrong, you are sinful or part of the team, right? The in-group and out-group part of salvation. So I think it is all very religious, and that's where I think you can kind of get those religious undertones in there, because when we talk about sin and repentance and things, those are all very similar lines to what they're talking about, right? You have to repent of your whiteness, you have to have white guilt, and if you're ashamed, then maybe we'll let you in the club.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of fundamental thinking that is anti very controlling, and you can't sin. Like people went on, the people, the conservative Christians who would get on you because they had a piercing or a tattoo, or you smoked, you drank or something, and you're going to hell for that. And then they just turn around and go the other direction with, you're white, you're you believe in capitalism, you believe in these things, you believe in actual equality, not equity. So you're going to hell for that too. You didn't say, you said these microaggressions, you're going to hell for that because you're whatever.
Mhm.
What was it? I had a weird. Never mind. I lost a train of thought.
Well, we can't talk about trains. That's part of white supremacy.
I was thinking of this. Like, I wonder, because so a lot of Christians are really trying to push. Like, it is true. So Jesus was not a white man.
Mm-hmm.
So people will kind of try to do the reverse. They kind of play the game of like, oh, Jesus was a brown man and he was killed by the authorities and such. And, so they try to use that as kind of a racial justice kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. It was police brutality, right? Because
exactly.
The Romans
and I'm like,
a minority.
I mean, if you want to keep it at a police brutality thing, it's like, yeah, you could maybe do something with that. But then they turn it like completely on its head to go, no, it's all that. And it's like, no, I think it was more so like being punished for the sins of the world. And it was like, this was a symbolism. It wasn't like exactly who was doing what. But I think in a way, like if they do play that, well, who was really the authorities in that situation of Jesus?
Well, yeah, and that one
Jews and Romans.
Yeah. And I think
so
in that
it's really
too,
the Jews and white people that you're supposed to hate in that situation. So inevitably, I think it's not that like they would consciously make this decision, but I think inevitably that's kind of that weird Christian progressivism, woke, kind of thinking could go in that way. Someone could just, I would say, cognitively, accidentally, not just be anti-white, but anti-Semitic.
I'll give you the caveat,
which is funny because the left does that, is anti-Semitic in its own way sometimes.
I mean, the church has a very, very sketchy past when it comes to anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah,
it's there. I'm not even gonna deny it, right? Luther and other people were very anti-Semitic, and it does come out of exactly the point that you're making. The Jews put Jesus to death, so it's not a very hard leap for a lot of people to take and be like, oh, well, this is what it is. Not understanding the verses that you called out of Colossians. There is neither Jew nor Greek, bond nor free, male or female. We're all one in Christ, right? He put to death the separation between the Gentiles and the Jews, nailing the enmity of the law against them, creating one new man. So in God's perspective, there are no more Jews. There are no more Gentiles. We're all one in Christ. But you don't get that nuance. You need a little more theology to see that throughout Scripture. And unfortunately, the Nazis touted Jesus. He was their guy based on that very simple understanding of the Jews put Jesus to death. So even the Catholic Church has had to come out and apologize for some of the things they said during the war and other places. A lot of that comes from Christianity, from a misunderstanding of Christianity. And to your point about, how people fall into this, like where does it get into the church? Unfortunately, without any kind of, how do I say, it's the reason we have 44,000 denominations. There is no pivotal thing to protect the church against the influx of this theology. So I mentioned liberation theology, which is basically communism. Liberation theology was packed in Latin America coming from the Catholic Church. You've had all sorts of types of social and unrest. It's in the Bible itself. If you read about the Grecians were Jews that spoke Greek, and they were not accepted in a lot of the churches. Again, race and other things are very much a part of what's going on. The Gentiles weren't invited into the synagogues, for instance. There's a lot of this different types of stuff. But if you don't work through those things, and you don't have the councils, and you don't have the church history to basically try to weed out the worst parts of this thing, you're susceptible to a lot of things coming in. And like I say, it is a religion. It's gonna find a way into Christianity, and pretty much all religions at some point are gonna have to be confronted with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, moving on from that, like we can talk about some of the verses they use, but also, what are some of the verses do you think kind of debunk the whole idea? The first one to me that I always gravitate to is Paul calls people who are offended by eating meat sacrificed to idols weak Christians.
Yeah.
Right. So he kind of plays the opposite of the offended opposition position. Right. So you're not necessarily strong because you're offended by something. You're actually weak. Right. And so he's like, yeah, if this truly offends you, sure, dodge it, but you're a weak Christian. You're a baby. Right. Paul kind of has this idea of mental toughness or spiritual toughness. Right. Where you're supposed to be able to go into the world and, get dirty and be able to roll with the punches. And if you're offended easily or always, out to judge people about that, then you suck. You know what I mean? You need to work on yourself to get that out of you. And so that's usually the first thing I think of. And I think that kind of cuts fully at the point of critical theory, where instead of oppression being your strength and your one truth, because everything else is deconstructed except how, bad I feel, Paul would say, no, how bad you feel is your problem. Right. You shouldn't feel bad doing all this crap. Who cares about food sacrifice idols? Who cares about circumcision? Who cares about this law or that law that you're trying to force on people? Like, it's not the fact that you want to do that just shows that you're not in a good mindset. Right. What do you guys think about that? And do you have any other verses that you think might have debunked?
I would agree with that, because he would say that the righteousness, understanding the righteousness of God is what made a person mature. And they were not nitpicking on all of these things to make you righteous, which is the premise of critical race theory. So, being oppressed, being a woman, being gay, maimed, whatever, being Muslim, whatever, points, those are all like ticking things to make you more virtuous in this oppression Olympics. And the whole premise of the gospel is you can't do anything to make yourself more righteous, more holy, more accepted, more loved, more forgiven. You've got it all, right? The more you agree with it, the more it'll manifest in your life. But none of that stuff gives you any kind of brownie points, which is why he was able to say, like, look, to the Jews, I became a Jew. To the Greeks, I was a Greek. To the barbarians, I became as a barbarian. None of that stuff actually adds or detracts anything from the individual. He would do all that he might win some, right? So that again is the premise. And I would say the one that really smashed it home for me is, again, the verse about one new man. Can't remember where it is. I think it might be in Corinthians, where basically he tore down the enmity between Jews and Gentiles, and he created in him one new man at the cross. This happened at the cross. This is past tense. So we're kind of all united in that, in the equality of Christianity. Some are awake to it, some are not. But that's why we preach. We preach to awaken people to, hey, we got this great relationship with God. We're in union and all these other things. All that other stuff adds nothing to you. It's all Christ all the time.
Yep.
The thing I was thinking was, for Paul to kind of really call out all of these, like sacrificing to idols, even circumcision really makes him a cut above the rest. But
That's all.
Ching.
But it's interesting. You see, basically, it's the same types of like thinking of, I have to do these things in order to be righteous. Whereas the reality, like you said, like you were talking about liberation theology, Brooke, and I think it's like there's all these theologies that kind of approach the truth but never quite get there. So there's like, I guess you could really just call it condemnation theology, like the theology of like the sinner, the unclean, the rags, the Christian that's always has to ask for forgiveness, always has to pray, always have to keep reaching. And you have liberation theology, so it's like you're kind of there, like you're in the fight of being liberated. And then, but when in reality, the thing is you're already liberated, you're already free, you're already righteous. It's like they all kind of get close, but not quite. And then it's like, no, everything's already there. And it's almost, and I've talked about this kind of like that problem of like being in a decadent society. So a lot of this critical theory, post-modernism, neo-Marxism and stuff is all really as a result of like being in a society of decadence. Like we have so much We have everything we need. We have all this food, shelter, water, electricity, safety in a lot of ways. Yeah. In general, I'm not talking like obviously everyone has things going on, but in general, we have these things. Even in the midst of a pandemic, there's all this stuff that is still going for us. And that's kind of like that through all of that, similar in like a theological sense, that Jesus is already won. We are already saved. We're already righteous. All this stuff is already done. We just have to realize it. Like, it's kind of like with Westerners. Like, we have all this going on for us. We don't really appreciate it. We want to shit on it. We want to completely, level it to go, no, this is not right. I have to do more to make me more deserving of these things because of original sin. Some sort of original sin, whether it's like I'm living in a colonized nation or something like that. And it's that same thing of like, even after all these years, and we're having all this, breakthrough in theology and understanding, we still come up with a new way to make it where we have to work for it. I'm not a sinner anymore. I'm just a white man now, which is somehow worse. Like,
I mean, to be fair, not every denomination has gotten away from the works theology. So,
but yeah, I mean, but it's such a weird mix. You got the works theology and the progressive sort of neo-Marxist, theology of now racial, gender, all these other issues that are mixed into it. I mean, how much of a mess would it be if you were in a church that had both the works theology and the woke theology all mixed in?
You'd go nuts. Hopefully,
yeah. I'd be like, I'd be like, yeah. You have to atone for the sins of both being a sinner and being a white man and being a man.
And being a Christian.
And being an American.
Christian white man.
And being a Christian.
Yeah, because Christianity is for the
being straight.
Those poor Muslims and Buddhists,
Yeah.
I mean, I think just to kind of caveat with that is the biggest. I mean, if the church would ever get over the issue of sin, if they really understood that the issue of sin is done, and I think the problem is even those that understand it, they're still looking for struggle. They're still looking for something to kind of, whatever. They're so hooked on earning brownie points. That's why the message of grace, the message of the cross, and all these other kinds of things always stop short of, yeah, God loves you, but they add these caveats
and you
into
can't
it.
call up brownie points.
Well, fair enough. What do you guys have? Scout points? I don't know.
No. I'm saying if you call up brownie points, then it's racist.
Yeah. But yeah, this is the problem, right? Even though you've come to the revelation of grace, all of it, you can't add anything. It's kind of like, then what? Then what's the point of life? And men and women still have this innate ability within us. We're looking for struggle, we're looking for challenge, and all these other things. So I mean, at least the Orthodox will give you the idea of, okay, seek theosis, right? You grow into your God likeness, and you still have a mission, basically. But for a lot of these people, it's kind of like, well, yeah, all right, you've made it to heaven, you've scored the touchdown, you've made it, you're the winner. Just live the rest of your life, and there's no more struggle. That's where this ground for all of this other kind of stuff is rich, because you do get a struggle. You get to fight, and you get to be the hero in your own make believe Don Quixote sort of way. And yeah, I think people are still, because the church hasn't given a deeper meaning to Christianity and a deeper goal to Christianity, they're kind of abandoning it. I've made it. I'm saved. Good. I've made it across the finish line. Nothing else matters. So this is why this is a breeding ground for kind of this theology.
For sure. Oh, yeah. But yeah, there's it's very interesting that to me, there's also a lot, because if you're talking about, critical race, critical gender, and then, if we talk about, the critical religion theory, right, where Christianity is the patriarchy in this example, or the white man, so to speak. It's obviously horribly logically irrational, right? But they don't care about that, right? But it's interesting how there's so much contradictions in there because virtually every religion disagrees with critical theory, right? Like one of the big things is like accusing people of Islamophobia, right? And they're trying to, talk about trying to normalize Islam at the expense of Christianity kind of thing. But Islam is the exact opposite of critical race theory of all time. Like, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And, we had the greatest meme of all time that was Islam is right about women. And, it was like an intersectional troll, right?
Yes.
Because it was able to troll and point out all the flaws with just one sentence with like 5 words in it, right?
Yeah.
That one sentence alone like completely destroyed their idea of like critical theory and intersectionality because the people they're trying to bat for don't even believe in this, right? And then you start getting into like TERFs or things like that, or something I've been talking about recently with some other people was the idea of there's 2 new forms of like trans, so to speak. There's trad trans, what we are calling it, which is people who actually believe there's male and female roles and they're transitioning between male and female.
Like binary trans people, basically.
Yeah, binary trans. Yeah, we called them trad trans because they still kind of like the original gender roles. They just wanted to switch teams. And then you have the, the gender fluid non-binary trans where you can change every 5 seconds, right, into one of 100 genders. And those are all very big different things, right? And all of those are attacking each other in addition to, like TERFs versus critical theory feminists. TERFs, for people who don't know, it's trans exclusionary radical feminists. And the most common one people always point out is J.K. Rowling because she's very pro-feminist, but she's anti-trans because she says now it's essentially putting biological males in female spaces and all of these kind of things. And so you're now getting infighting in between them because of all of this, right? And the idea itself has its own innate contradictions, but they don't care.
and ultimately they're establishing the supremacy that they claim to be trying to tear down.
Yeah.
So, it's inherently racist, it's inherently sexist, it's supremacism. So if you're saying that, if you're a white straight male, you have all the power, you're admitting that you're a white supremacist, right? You're basically saying those are the people who are on top and everybody's below them, which means you got the soft bigotry of low expectation when it comes to people of color. That is inherently racist.
Yeah.
Or just saying that, all men are oppressing women in the workspace. You're inherently saying that being a man is superior to being a woman, right? You don't actually believe in equality, right? So as you say, the foundations of what they're trying to espouse are inherently contradictory and establishing the very thing they claim to be trying to tear down. So it doesn't win on any side.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I posted the StreamYard link in the chat a couple minutes ago. Feel free to come in and Q&A, and we've got Tom in the back. Are we ready for some Tom?
Let's do it.
All right. Tom is in the house. What's going on, Tom?
What's happening, Tom?
Hey, doing good. How are you guys?
Oh, I'm
in pain.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's getting better.
I thank you for taking my call. So my question was, have you guys have any experience with like resonating with people, not necessarily of your race, like not just white, black, Asian, but like of your ethnicity as well? Like, do you sense like subtle resonance, like, if you're Irish, or like for me, I'm Jewish and I don't look Jewish to most people, but I think like I'm kind of histrionic a little neurotic, and when I get around other Jews, I feel that resonance a bit, but it's not enough that like I seek to live around them at all times. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
maybe.
Interesting take.
You want
Amos,
maybe
sorry,
reword
Colin,
it a little better. Yeah.
Okay, so like Brooke, you are apparently part Asian. I would never guess that you're Asian, but do you feel a resonance when you're around Asians that you don't feel around white people?
I don't know if it's a resonance. I'll give you this story. I was telling Kong, like, anybody interested, you could go on my YouTube channel, and I did a DNA test, and I'm like 16% black, and I have some Jewish in me, but like all the spicy good stuff comes from my mom. My dad is basically like 100% European.
So what Brooke's basically saying is he's the epitome of multiracial white.
Yeah, I'm like really mixed up. Although the majority of it is like 70% of it is European and whatever, right? And I like Amos dropped this question on me a while ago. So anybody's looking, like, I'm wearing Gungnir, which is the spear of Odin, right? And I have a couple Norse symbols throughout my house. I was raised in the Caribbean to not particularly any kind of Viking heritage or anything like that. They were just like, middle-class working family and all of these things. And then suddenly I come to the UK and I suddenly tap into this whole Norse thing. For me, it was all about being strong as a man and whatever.
Yeah.
And then in the midst of it, Amos and I were having the conversation, like, do you have any Scandinavian connection or anything like that? I was like, not really. The DNA test said this, that, and the other. I didn't really have any Norwegian. But then I went to a specific DNA kind of thing that like looks for that specifically. And I'm like 70% Scandinavian Viking. And I had no clue. I had absolutely no clue. So to kind of go to your point, I don't know. There may be something genetic. And this is a theory. I'm not saying there's a lot of science to believe this. But the thought of genetic memory and the thought of there are traces of things that are kind of stuck in our DNA, it is a real field of study. I can't say that I've ever had that kind of resonance that you're talking about. But I think there may be some kind of inherent connection within the DNA that I had no idea, but somehow it found expression. And when I was younger, I was all into martial arts. I was all into dragons. I was all into like Chinese writing and like really tapping into that. And that became like a big part of my identity. Maybe not so much now, but yeah, that it is part of who I am. So people are kind of pointing to those trigger signs. I can't say I've ever felt a resonance, but there may be something to it. We need more research, really.
Mhm.
Or what about you, Amos? I don't really know what ethnicity of Asian you are, or if you feel anything like a resonance with people that are Asian.
I'm more half and half than Brooke. So I'm
Yeah.
literally, half white, half Asian. So
Oh, I was going to guess Nigeria, but I guess I was a little.
it's not really.
I'm
not
Nigerian.
really much of like. I mean, it's when it comes to that term resonance. I guess I'm not really. I mean, I've been with both parts of my family, and there isn't any more resonance or not resonance. It's just family is family to me. So I don't have any experiences kind of like with Brooke, where all of a sudden I had a deep interest in martial arts or something, or I had a sudden craving for Polish sausage because that's my white side. I know I have a closer connection in terms of genealogy to my Polish side of the family. Like I've anytime anyone talks about family origins and stuff, I'll talk about like kind of my background and the people that I know about, like the first ancestors that came to the U.S. Like I know the first one with my name came to the U.S. back in like the 1840s, 1850s around. We have the paperwork from Ellis Island. We have like we know where that guy is buried here in Minnesota, stuff like that. And there's that. Whereas on my Chinese side of my family, I don't really know too much beyond like my great grandmother. That's about it. So that was just because like my grandfather and my uncle were really into genealogy and did a lot of digging. I just liked knowing that. It's not really like a resonance thing. It's just I know that.
So when you get around Chinese people, do you ever be like, oh, these people think like me in a certain way? Like I have something in common with these people that I don't usually encounter in my normal life, not usually being around Chinese people.
Well, that's the problem with being half and half, is you're never fitting in anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, with most people, like, if you have friends and such that don't care about such things, it doesn't matter. But I'm an outsider to both in a way.
Yeah.
So, I'm Asian among white people, and I'm white among Asian people. That's kind of I was talking to some people about this. Like, it's a very odd thing for mixed race people. Is you're not like you really have to like be willing to kind of carve your own path culturally.
Right.
Appreciate what you want, throw away whatever you don't want. some either get
How
caught
very
one back.
postmodern of you. How very.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a very like it's almost treacherous because a lot of that tends to lead down sort of the more like critical theory side of things. Like I've talked to people, so being half Chinese and half white, there's the term Hapa, which is being thrown around a lot. Well, there is an entire subreddit where Hapas like to complain about racism. I've told some people about this. It's like it's a bunch of like self-defeating, whiny half Asian kids that are all whining because they think their dad is a racist because he was white and basically, quote unquote, they think like he like fetishized over an Asian woman one day and raped her and had them. And it's like, no, like,
yeah.
I think we should just keep it at, your parents fell in love and had you. I think it's pretty simple. It doesn't have to be this whole thing of like where it's like, he colonized her or whatever. It's like, no,
And Amos,
he wasn't laying pipe. He was laying. What's that?
Even the reverse is kind of racist because if it's a white woman with an Asian guy, that's kind of elevated. That's kind of like, wow, this is so good versus the other way around. Is that right?
Yeah.
So how does that work? Like,
they don't believe that you're laying pipe. They believe you're laying railroads. Like that's really. But that's the thing. Is like you can't. I've talked to people like I did a whole little thing on Twitter once where I posted like, mocking this, like, here's me, the product of racism. It was like a baby picture of me. And then I posted another one of my parents on their honeymoon. I said, look at them. Look at him just, completely colonizing and dominating her. It's not like we fell in love or anything. Like,
right.
Look at this wedding, how Western and white supremacist. It's just like, no, like,
we do got to wrap this up.
We got,
we might want to wrap this one up. We do got Heather in the back, so
you don't count. You're white. We don't care about your.
I know exactly. I'm a cisgender heterosexual.
I mean, why would
Christian
you resonate
male.
with anyone? You American people all the time.
I'm intersexual. Intersexual. That's not what I'm. Intersectional, oppressing everybody. I'm the bad guy in every form. But
thank you.
Yeah, but yes. I do want to say I do think it's like, to me, at least in my personal lived experience, it's a lot more about culture than it is about the race you're born with. Because I am a gringo, I'm a big white guy, but I grew up in Hispanic culture, right? So I identify more with a lot of Hispanic values and cultural norms than I do white. And that's just kind of the way it is. And if you can learn to like jump into a culture and adapt and adopt what you can, like it definitely changes everything quite a bit. All right, but thanks for hopping on, Tom. I appreciate it.
Good to see you, bro.
Have a good one, man. All right, we've got Heather here. Heather, this will be very interesting. I think you'll have a lot to say as a robot that identifies as female. I think this is the perfect target audience for talking about this.
This show has been a challenge for me, actually, because I listen to a lot of things that cover the stuff that you were talking about in the beginning, and I was kind of like, not this again, because I listen to that all the time to try and round out my own thinking, because I am more of a liberal leaning thinker, and I struggle with things, and I was like wondering, like, when is this going to tie into the religion connection so that I stay on listening, because I was kind of like, I just kind of need a break from that sometimes. But I'm wondering isn't it logical that at this point in time that the church would be venturing into a different sort of way of thinking about different things? Because for the longest time, the church directed society. And now society is directing the church in some cases. And it's like, it just seems almost like, and I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent, just isn't it the natural progression based on what's going on? I mean, when I went to church as a child, you know, it was very strict, not anything fun about it, not, you know, I mean, I looked forward to Sunday school when I was little, but I don't know. It's like they have so many more things now to draw people in. And in some cases that might be good, and in some cases it might be bad. I don't know. I just feel like these transitions are happening all over the place with the way people approach things in their life. And, you know, a number of the things that you mentioned that, you know, as someone who leans more liberally, I mean, I don't fall into that category a lot. You know, it's like, I mean, some people would call me a TERF. Some people would call, you know what I mean? But it depends on the situation. And it's not that I'm against anything per se, except certain specific things. It's like there are specifications and small aspects of it that I just don't think are appropriate, especially in regard to children. When it comes to children, I have some issues with the things that go on, but with the church, I don't know. Because I went through so many different transitions in the church growing up. It's all, you know, and I don't attend a regular service now. But I don't know. It just seems like it's going to progress to a certain point, and then it's going to come back around again.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
doesn't it always?
For the most part. I mean, at the beginning, you were saying that the church used to run culture. Now the culture runs church. I would argue the culture has always run church. They've always adapted to the thing of the time. Like before, when the Pope was, you know, was equal or stronger than the king of a nation, that's because authoritarian was in, right? And most people do that. And you got feudalist societies and things like that. So I think the church has always been adopting to culture. And I just want to say from this standpoint, if you only believe part of critical theory and reject other parts, they still see you as the enemy. You're the bad guy, right? You're still the infidel apostate because you don't adopt everything they believe all the time. Like before we're talking about, it is a religion and you are now a sinner because you only held to 50% of the beliefs instead of 100%. It's kind of like if we said, somebody came in and said, hey, Jesus was a cool guy and all, but I don't think he was really God. I just think he said some nice things. It would be hard for us to call them a Christian, right? And likewise with them, you could say, hey, I believe in this thing and this thing, but giving kids hormones, that's a little sketchy. Boom, you're now instantly part of the patriarchy and you're the bad guy, right? So it's definitely not something to hit your horse on, you know?
Yeah, it just gets overwhelming because it's like the intersectionality of everything seems to just take over. And it's like, not that I don't think there's some intersectionality that needs to be recognized with certain issues. I mean, there are some things, you know, what was mentioned earlier about the wage gap. I remember working in retail, being a supervisor at a store, working overtime whenever it was needed, doing all kinds of things. This young man who was, in my opinion, rather lazy, didn't do a lot of things, got promoted to supervisor and was given a wage higher than mine. That was in the 90s, early 90s. So, you know, it's like when it comes to all of these things, yes, anecdotal evidence. You know, it's not the same thing, but that's on the low level of the scale. I'm not talking about like executives and stuff like that. That's a whole different element. I'm talking about just in general. I mean, I was not a middle class level paid level worker at that time. I was definitely, working, in the poorer realm of the spectrum. And, any little bit made a difference. So it's like, there's always going to be something going on. And I'd like to just, remind you of that. There are things that happen, like the big stuff, the big executive stuff, the stuff that we hear about, that's all, it gets more attention because of it being like higher end money. It's like those of us who have worked in the lower end spectrum of the financial world, it's different.
Mm-hmm.
It's different. Yeah. It's different when you're poor. Yeah, it's different when you're trying to feed yourself and you're dividing up the giant can of soup into different containers so that you can pack your lunch to take to work. It's different. So it's like a lot of times in the YouTube stuff I listen to, I find that it's comparing things at a much higher level, and that's not necessarily the reality for most people. I apologize. My dog's in the background making noise.
No. But yeah, I would agree. So like we do have like weird skewed views of racism and sexism right now, but I would say classism probably has the most merit of something that's worth talking about. I think there's most evidence. And this is something I've noticed because I've worked in poor communities like my whole life. I've lived in them and all that kind of stuff. And like the struggles of a black teenager in the hood are very similar to the struggles of a poor hillbilly in a trailer park in the mountains, right? Absolutely. They have a lot more in common than somebody who's upper middle class, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Absolutely. So, yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that point for sure. What do you guys think?
I was just going to say, Heather, in terms of you are actually doing what you're supposed to do, which is actually look at the nuance of the situation. A person will look at, okay, so your story about, the young boy came in lazy and he got the promotion and stuff like that. Somebody's going to instantly say, okay, that's sexism. Well, maybe that's the case, but do we know? Maybe he had nepotism. Maybe he knew somebody who worked there and they're like, all right, that's my boy. Most jobs tend to be nepotism anyway. When I first got to the UK and I didn't know anybody, I couldn't get a job even if I tried. We don't know. But at least that's what's beautiful about your approach is that you're looking at all of the factors. It's not always just one thing. And that has kind of been the point of the discussion is that these people come to the conclusion before they look at the evidence. And they're presupposing this is what it's going to be. And I agree with you. I am tired of all of the intersectional stuff and stuff. If there's genuine injustice, if anybody here on the panel saw like a genuine act of racism, I'm pretty sure we're all like, no, that's wrong. And everybody could unite around that. The problem is the more these types of language is being thrown at things that really may not be and stuff, you devalue the real cases of racism and the real cases of sexism. When people are saying, oh, some guy called me cute and suddenly he's a rapist, or all of the genuine female experiences that you've had become devalued when it's being applied to everything. So I applaud. I know exactly where you're at. I love where you're at. I appreciate your questions and your comments. And I agree with you. Yeah, it's a tiring subject. And some people aren't familiar with it in the church, so we had to take the long way around to get to the church.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, is this my sociology class?
Yeah, exactly.
What the heck is happening?
So
but in regard to that situation at work, I was actually friends with the manager.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
When I found out what had happened, she told me that it came from corporate, that she was to offer him more money because of him being a guy who could possibly have a family. Now that was before any law stuff happened. Yeah. And is it true? Or is that what she just told me?
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's no
We'll never know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And, there was another situation that had occurred where someone it happened at work, and this was a temporary employee, and he came up to me. I was his supervisor, and he wanted to tell me a joke. And he started to tell me the joke, and I could kind of gather the direction it was going. And I said, hold on. I said, I'm going to stop you right here. Don't say anything else. Because this, you cannot say this at work. It's not, he's like, no, you're going to find it funny because I know you get it. I know your sense of humor. And I said, please, you have to stop.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I am going to have to handle this in a different way. And I don't want to have to do that. Stop yourself now. But it's like, you know, and it's like a lot of things that came up in the stuff over the past few years. If someone had just said stop or no, it could have possibly prevented a dramatic situation. But unfortunately, what happened was people didn't have examples of how to do that, and they fed off of it. And I mean, I even found that I was making more out of things than what I realized because it was bringing up old stuff for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like people don't recognize that. And then you have all these people going through these sensitivity issues who are now all in church. And long way around the barn, again, you know, you have people who are feeling oversensitized to everything, and now they're the majority.
Yeah.
And it always falls to the majority, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they're the majority, but they're definitely the loudest.
The loudest.
Tyranny of democracy. But we do have one more in the back, Heather. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. You have a good week.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Amos didn't get to chime in, man. You know.
All right. We got one more in the back, and we're gonna have to wrap it up after that. Seamus, how are you?
What's happening, man?
Doing good. How's it going?
Oh, I'm getting by.
Sorry, I caught it late. I just woke up.
Well, welcome,
lucky man.
So, yeah, I don't really go to church anymore just because the churches I went to, they really embrace some thoughts. And it's not just like the critical theory stuff, but like some other things. And I'm just like, it doesn't feel like church anymore. It doesn't feel like religion is the center of focus. It's more socializing and other things. And then from there, there were splits. There was the liberal churchgoers and the conservative churchgoers, and I just went out into the woods. That was my new church, going out to the woods to get away from. So I've been out of the fight.
No complaints here. Yeah.
Well over a decade. And actually, one of the funnier things is I didn't realize what I was doing until much later. I grew up Baptist, right? Mm-hmm. And I just could not get around some of the things from my childhood. Very abusive father figure who was a POS, drugs, alcohol, etc. So I was like, well, deuces, I'm out on that front. And he would actually use the Bible as a weapon against us.
Oh, yeah.
So
I
went, and so I turned around and I went full pagan. Like I dove into my heritage, all the Nordic gods. I've got tattoos and all this other stuff, all the runes. Dove headfirst into that and would eventually come back to Christianity on my own terms. And I still don't go to church. I just, the nature is my church kind of thing. But it was a lack of masculinity and a lack of leadership, a lack of that steadfast, this is what we do and we do not bend for anyone kind of attitude that, Thor, Odin, all of them, they kind of espouse those things. And I didn't see it in the church. And one of the coolest things was when I came back to the church, I was listening to some podcast about religion. They're like, people forget Jesus is a king. If you were a knight in old times and you were serving a king, what would he require of you? Now go read the Bible with that mindset. And I was like, holy crap. Okay, cool. And so now I'm basically I consider it like this. I'm a pagan who was converted. by the actual Bible, not by a church.
Mhm.
And I don't know, when people are like, oh, what's your religion? I'm like, you don't want to know.
Yeah.
That will make you angry on so many levels. But quickly to run back to the topic, the leftist theories. What I always tell people is be very careful of any ideology because they always start with a grain of truth. And I think to
Mhm.
really get the big picture, you have to listen to both sides, because the left-sided mindset is very much compassion, emotion, caring. But when it turns into that ideology, it kind of takes over and becomes something very bad.
Mhm.
The same way that tradition, culture, conservatism, it has some very good points and it's aimed in the right direction. But when taken to an extreme, like in my childhood, it can be a very bad thing.
Mhm.
Find the nuggets of truth. Don't let any ideology kind of grip a hold of you without you also reaching out to grapple with it and come to terms with it yourself. And it's hard to see people doing that on their own because a lot of people just want to be told what to do. And the church has very much shifted away from that, which is kind of weird. You would think in this age that they would double down on this is how it's done, we do it this way.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to me that they're actually going to the left and kind of out in the left field. I mean, it's fine. It doesn't really affect me, but watching it is kind of like watching the train's not on fire yet, but they're covering it with tar and speeding straight into an area with a flare. It's not quite there yet, but it's obviously going to happen sooner or later.
Yeah. I would say right now, I think one of the big reasons the church is going left is like before we're talking about, most of the time the church actually follows the culture. And so if you look, 10 years ago when UFC first got cool, you'd see a lot of, I'm the cool hip pastor with the tattoos and the affliction t-shirt. I like MMA. Come on over. Right. And you'll see all those things. And then you got the hipster ones. And now you kind of got the critical theory. It's because now that's cool. And they think that's a relevant way to get people. I think that's part of it. And they're also, I was going to say the other part is they're also way more into like trying to be like the liberal, cool Christian university. And, that's where most Marxism breeds is in universities. Right. So I think those two together, I think is kind of why it's getting really big.
Yeah. And the coolest church I ever went to that I actually, I didn't stay in the town. So, obviously, but I actually did consider staying there. It was a church that was made by a whole bunch of former bikers, like not just, we ride around on motorcycle bikers. We're talking they fly colors. They are the 1% bikers.
Yeah. 3 patches.
But they were all former. That was the coolest church. You want to talk about some masculine energy that has some control and restraint after lessons learned the hard way. Whoo, that was good. We had shotgun shoots and everything, and we'd sit around and do Bible studies, and that was cool. Yeah, that's probably the only way to go back to churches with those guys.
Yeah, and I mean,
hey man, you guys are great. I love listening to this stuff.
Oh yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Oh yeah, I'll check you guys out next time.
All right, have a good one, man.
Later.
All right, peace. Yeah, I was going to say that kind of goes along when he's talking about the biker church is in counseling. The counselors who get the most done and people are most well received are the ones that were also addicts before.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
They know it. They know the story, the journey. Yeah.
Yeah, you do have that kind of lived experience of they know exactly what they're talking about. They're not just talking about textbooks or slideshows, right?
Call it testimony.
Yeah, exactly. So if you've actually done some, real shit, and then you talk to other people that are trying to get out of that too, it's going to go way farther than, going to school and reading some textbooks. So, yep. Let's, we're definitely over. It was definitely a filled conversation. Do we want to do our final thoughts? Amos, do you have some final thoughts for us that are special?
Special final thoughts?
No, leave me for last because I got to talk about that one thing. So,
oh yeah.
Well,
I was gonna let you go first so that I can make fun of you for it, but
oh, wow.
I mean, just quickly. I mean, yeah, it's a lengthy topic. Just to hit on something Seamus said really quick. Not all of the church is going down this road. which I think there is a exodus of evangelicals and Protestants and Assemblies of God. They're going back to the Orthodox and the Catholics, because the Orthodox and the Catholics are kind of, not entirely, but they're definitely holding it off for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
The Catholics might slip faster than the Orthodox, because the Orthodox haven't changed in 2,000 years. So there are a lot of, like you say, that masculine energy, the leadership, all those things. A lot of people are kind of going back in that direction. So yeah, it's good to have that foundation. Guys, always focus on Christ. If you're going down all these other rabbit holes, unless you're really called to it, some people might actually be called to deal with justice and other things like that. Although I think Conk is right. It's a lot more trend and trying to fit in than actually like a genuine expression of your calling and destiny and these other things. So keep your eyes on Christ, trust the Christ in you. He'll never lead you wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, my final thoughts, if we had another 30 minutes, I really wanted to go into where do we go from here kind of thing.
But solutions.
I'll try to do my Cliff Notes version of basically where do we go from here are solutions, because obviously they don't have any, right? We just talked about critical theory is about literally the criticism. There's no solution. They remind me of the underpants gnomes from South Park, where their strategy to get rich was step 1, collect underpants. Step 2, I don't know. Step 3, profit. Yeah. And so mostly anything that involves Marxism is underpants gnomes. And remember that. As far as how we deal with them, I think a lot of it is, this is something I talked about way near the beginning of Religion Zero shows. If we go back, talking about if your head's too far in the clouds, you're going to start tripping on Earth, right? And you just learn to find that more realistic stuff. What is something you literally can't deconstruct, right? What is something that's actually true in our physical reality right now? Things like math, engineering, medical sciences, right? Good luck trying to postmodern deconstruct, cancer research, right? You can't take half of one paper and half another paper and expect that guy to do any good treatments, right? You definitely don't want a postmodernist heart surgeon, right? Or a mechanic working on your car. You got to realize that there is still a lot of you got to find a blend between heaven and earth, so to speak. You can't be all ideology and you can't be all physicality, right? Because both of those get you in really weird skewed directions. And if I could talk longer, I'd talk about how they're both going actually in the same direction of a certain type of dysfunction. But in general, you got to realize we're still on earth. We're still in this game. We still got to play this game. It still exists, right? And realize how far their ideologies do not appeal to reality, right? And be able to at least base yourself in that, and then don't argue with people about this because they don't care about rationality. Either ignore them completely or troll them, right? That's the only thing I can think of. They don't fight in rationality, so there's no point in doing it, right? You wouldn't ask your dog to do your homework because they don't understand homework. Just like critical theory actually doesn't understand rationality because that's actually patriarchal in their own definition. So, keep those two intermingled. Don't let them separate it. Or heaven and earth issues. All right, Amos,
bring it home.
All right. Postmodernism is bad. Okay. No, I was just thinking.
Okay.
You mentioned South Park. I was like,
Okay.
It's interesting. You look at these different ways of thinking. Like I said, it's always good to criticize. I shouldn't say it's always good to criticize. The heart, the intentions that brought this criticism was fine. It was always the solutions that they offered that kind of went sideways. So, you gotta understand kind of what are your goals when you think about these things. Like for postmodern thinking, neo-Marxist and even critical theory and stuff like this. What is the goal? Because if you're just sitting there and just deconstructing and just questioning all day and you have no real goal, it's no wonder that you get to these weird conclusions that don't actually reflect much reality. That's why the Socratic method tends to focus on getting to the bottom of it. Whereas the Socratic method is digging a hole to get to the bottom of it, to find what is actually true. Critical theory and sort of the incest baby of postmodern neo-Marxism is just dig.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's more like they'll tell you what's at the bottom without digging.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they tell you what's at the bottom without digging, and they make fun of, and then you're a bad person if you try to actually dig.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
But I mean, I think, yeah, but then, well, this is the thing too, is I think like, and then for those who dig and happen to hit, like, let's, for example, since we're keeping this real world, like if you hit a water pipe or a gas line, that's, they won't take responsibility for it. Well, you didn't dig it right. Well, you really did, but see is what happens when you dig. You find all this stuff that you get hurt, or you're not really supposed to know this stuff. Like, it's really messy, because it's one is trying to find answers, the other is
trying to tell you the answer.
Trying to tell you the answers with very it's very surface level kind of thinking. So yeah, I don't know much else to really go beyond that. I think most people, like, I mean, I call it boredom, but really it's just that sort of like, anytime a society reaches a certain level of like luxury and prosperity and wealth, people get bored enough that they start questioning things, and they question things for the sake of questioning things. Then those questions turn to really bad solutions or answers, like, oh, well, this doesn't look so good, so let's question it this way. Well, I think it's this. It's like, no, there's real issues here. You want to look at all the wrong things. You take away from the real issue. So, but I was mentioning at the end here, I was going to make a little announcement. So we've been doing what, 48 episodes?
Yeah.
48 episodes here. And when we first started talking about doing the show and everything, I was really on board, because I had, like, Brooke and myself, like, and just with our ministry background, we really didn't, I didn't really get to talk much about anything, theology and stuff, and just where I was personally with my beliefs and such. I didn't really feel much need. But having this show and everything and talking about stuff on a weekly basis definitely has, like, gotten a lot out of me. Like, a lot of thoughts and ideas. It's like you've opened up a tap that hasn't been open in a while. So there's been a lot of good stuff. But just where I am right now, and with everything, I felt that I'm kind of at the point, I've started to reach a point where, like, I kind of have to forcefully draw in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like, it's like the difference between a guy who, like, really wants to preach something versus the guy who is feeling he has to preach because it's Sunday. It's kind of an obligation versus something you really want to do. So I'm kind of reaching that point. Not that I don't love talking about any of this. It's just, there's been such a regular supply of discussion and ideas that I've kind of had my fill, so to speak, at least for now. Mm-hmm. So for the foreseeable future, I will not be on Religion Zero. I will come back every now and then, if it's kind of, whether it's a big topic or like something like that, or if it's something that I could really feel like coming on for. But as it stands, I won't be coming on regularly, at least.
All right.
If not at all, for a while. So
it's all good. But yeah, we were happy to have you on here, Amos. Your seat's always warm. And Bobby, if you're out there too, your seat is still warm.
Yeah, because we do have a group chat on Facebook. It's the Religion Zero group chat, and Bobby's been in there the whole time. He's still there.
Yeah, still there.
So he sees everything we talk about, and I'll still be there too. I'll still be seeing, like, all the different episodes that'll come up
and the memes.
In the memes, yeah. So,
well, you'll be missed, Amos. You always have interesting comments.
I'll still be on our show.
Yeah, and your big brain, commentary that people love. I know Heather really loves when you get all hypothetical. So yeah, you'll be missed. You'll be missed.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Sure.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, that was Religion Zero number 48, number 49. We'll figure out what we do next week in post. Well,
I guess it's on my channel.
All right.
Awesome,
but yeah, We loved having you, Amos. And yeah, you're always welcome back. It's always good. The more the merrier. And definitely people that have actually been in ministry and done the hard work, like we were just talking about with drug counselors and biker pastors. It's good to always have somebody that knows, what the hell we're talking about and has the lived experience of how shitty ministry can get. So,
Yeah.
all right, awesome. Well, all of y'all have a good rest of your week. Next week, we'll figure it out. Y'all have a good one.
Thanks so much.